Over 20,000 people have vanished in Alaska, and in some cases, not a single trace was ever found. The map shows a vast empty space between Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than wilderness. But this region, later known as the Alaska Triangle, has become the center of a pattern that is still not fully understood. From above, the land appears endless. Thick forests stretch for hundreds of miles without interruption. Mountain ranges rise sharply, covered in snow for most of the year. Glaciers move slowly across the terrain, reshaping the ground beneath them. Rivers cut through valleys, often freezing solid in winter and flooding unpredictably in warmer months. There are no clear boundaries here, no defined paths. In many areas, there are no roads at all. Travel between these locations is not simple. Even today, reaching certain parts of this region requires aircraft or long, difficult journeys through rough terrain. Entire sections of land remain largely untouched, not because they are protected, but because they are too remote to access consistently. Weather conditions add another layer of complexity. Clear skies can shift within minutes. Sudden storms can reduce visibility to zero. Fog can settle over valleys and remain for hours. In winter, temperatures drop to extreme levels, turning even short exposure into a life-threatening risk. Navigation is not always reliable. Mountains interfere with signals. Remote zones lack consistent tracking coverage. In some areas, communication with the outside world becomes unstable or disappears entirely. For those unfamiliar with the environment, it is easy to underestimate how quickly conditions can change. A route that appears manageable on a map can become impassable in reality. Landmarks are often repetitive, making orientation difficult even for experienced travelers. This isolation has defined the region for decades. Unlike other parts of North America, where infrastructure connects cities and towns, much of this area exists without direct human control. Settlements are sparse and widely separated. Emergency response times are slow, not due to lack of effort, but because of distance and terrain. The scale itself creates a problem. When something goes wrong here, there is often no immediate way to respond. This combination of vast wilderness, limited access, and unpredictable conditions has made the region one of the least explored areas on the continent. It is not empty, but it behaves as if it is beyond reach. And within this environment, something else has quietly developed over time. A pattern. Because in a place where navigation is difficult, communication is unstable, and the land itself resists exploration, even a small incident can quickly disappear without a trace. And in this region, many have. What began as isolated incidents slowly turned into a pattern that was harder to ignore. By the early 1970s, reports of missing persons across Alaska were no longer rare. Cases were being recorded in different parts of the state, often separated by vast distances, with no direct connection between them. Hunters failed to return. Travelers disappeared along routine routes. Small aircraft went missing without sending distress signals. At first, these incidents were treated individually. Each case had its own explanation, its own circumstances, its own search effort. But over time, a larger picture began to form. Alaska, despite having a relatively small population, was recording a disproportionately high number of missing persons cases compared to other regions in the United States. Over the decades, estimates have suggested that more than 20,000 people have been reported missing since the 1970s. While many of these individuals are eventually found, either alive or deceased, a significant number remain unresolved. This is where concern began to grow. When adjusted for population size, Alaska's missing persons rate has consistently remained higher than the national average. This does not mean every case is mysterious. In fact, many are linked to known causes such as accidents, environmental exposure, or human error. But the volume itself raises questions. Why here? The reports come from across the state, but a noticeable concentration appears within the region between Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik. Over time, this area began to stand out, not because of one single event, but because of repetition. Search and rescue teams have responded to thousands of these cases. In many situations, they are successful. Individuals are located, often injured, sometimes disoriented, but alive. However, there are also cases where the search yields nothing, no tracks, no belongings, no clear indication of what happened. In some instances, people vanish along routes they are familiar with. Experienced outdoorsmen disappear in terrain they have navigated for years. Pilots flying known paths failed to reach their destination without leaving behind any evidence of mechanical failure or emergency. Each of these cases adds another layer to the growing record. Authorities continue to document and investigate these disappearances using standard procedures. There is no official classification that labels the region as abnormal. From a scientific and law enforcement perspective, the explanation remains grounded in environmental risk and logistical challenges. But statistics have a way of shaping perception. As the numbers increased, so did public attention. Media reports began highlighting the pattern. The idea of a specific region associated with disappearances started to take hold, not because every case was unexplainable, but because too many of them remained incomplete. And in a place where the land itself can erase evidence within hours, even a single unanswered case can leave a lasting impression. Here, there were thousands. On October 16, 1972, a routine flight prepared to leave Anchorage, heading toward Juneau. There was nothing unusual about the journey. The route was known, the aircraft was capable, the pilot was experienced. On board were 4 men, including 2 of the most prominent political figures in Alaska at the time, Hale Boggs and Nick Begich. They were traveling for official purposes, part of a normal schedule that required frequent movement across the state. Alongside them were an aide and the pilot, both familiar with the demands of Alaskan travel. The aircraft departed as expected. For a time, everything appeared routine. There were no immediate signs of trouble. No distress calls were transmitted. No emergency signals were recorded. But somewhere along the route, contact was lost. At first, the delay did not cause immediate alarm. Flights in Alaska often face minor disruptions due to weather or terrain. But as time passed, concern began to grow. When the aircraft failed to arrive in Juneau, authorities initiated a search. What followed was one of the largest and most intensive search operations in United States history. Military aircraft, Coast Guard units, and civilian teams were deployed across a massive area of wilderness. Search planes scanned mountains, forests, and coastal regions. Ground teams moved through difficult terrain, attempting to locate any sign of wreckage. The search expanded continuously, covering thousands of square miles. The conditions made every effort more difficult. Weather systems shifted rapidly. Visibility dropped without warning. Mountain ranges created blind zones where aircraft could not easily search. Communication between teams was limited by distance and geography. Days turned into weeks. Despite the scale of the operation, nothing was found. No debris field, no oil slick, no broken parts of the aircraft. Not even a trace that could confirm where the plane had gone down. The absence of evidence was as striking as the disappearance itself. Eventually, the search was called off. The official conclusion suggested that the aircraft likely crashed somewhere within the vast wilderness, possibly due to environmental factors, such as weather or terrain. But without physical evidence, this remained an assumption rather than a confirmed fact. The disappearance of these men had a lasting impact. It was not just the loss of prominent individuals. It was the realization that even with significant resources, advanced equipment, and immediate response, an aircraft could vanish completely within this region. No signal, no wreckage, no explanation. This case became one of the defining events associated with the Alaska Triangle, not because it proved anything unusual, but because it exposed a critical reality. In this environment, it is possible for something large, structured, and closely monitored to simply disappear. And once it does, finding it again is not guaranteed. Long before theories began to form, the environment itself had already provided a clear explanation for many of the disappearances. Alaska is not just remote. It is one of the most physically demanding landscapes on Earth. Within the region of the Alaska Triangle, conditions can shift from stable to life-threatening in a matter of minutes. A clear sky can turn into a storm without warning. Winds can rise suddenly, carrying snow, ice, or freezing rain that reduces visibility to almost nothing. In higher elevations, cloud cover can drop so low that even experienced pilots lose their visual reference points. For anyone on the ground, the risks are immediate. Temperatures can fall rapidly, even during seasons that appear mild. Hypothermia does not require extreme winter conditions. It can begin in cold rain, strong wind, or prolonged exposure to low temperatures. Once it sets in, judgment becomes impaired, movement slows, and survival chances decrease quickly. The terrain makes every situation more difficult. Dense forests limit visibility and slow movement. It becomes easy to lose direction, even over short distances. Landmarks repeat, creating a sense of disorientation. Without clear navigation tools, a person can walk in circles without realizing it. In mountainous areas, the danger increases further. Slopes can become unstable. Avalanches can occur without warning, especially after fresh snowfall or temperature shifts. A single misstep can lead to a fall with no chance of recovery. Water adds another layer of risk. Rivers in this region are often fast-moving and extremely cold. Falling into one, even briefly, can lead to immediate shock and rapid loss of body heat. In winter, frozen surfaces may appear solid but can break under weight, trapping individuals in freezing water. Wildlife is also part of the environment. Encounters with animals such as bears are rare, but when they occur, they can be dangerous. More commonly, the presence of wildlife forces individuals to remain alert and cautious, adding stress to already difficult survival conditions. For those traveling by air, these environmental factors become even more critical. Small aircraft rely heavily on visual navigation. Sudden fog, snow, or cloud cover can obscure terrain completely. Mountains can appear without warning through low visibility. Wind patterns around these formations can create turbulence that is difficult to control. When a problem occurs in such conditions, there is often little time to react. And if an aircraft goes down in a remote area, survival depends entirely on the environment that follows. Rescue operations face the same challenges. Search teams must cover vast areas with limited information. Weather can delay or completely stop aerial searches. Ground teams may take days to reach a location, only to find no trace of what they are looking for. Snowfall, wind, and natural movement of the land can erase evidence quickly. This is the reality that defines the Alaska Triangle. Many disappearances do not require unusual explanations. They can be understood through a combination of harsh weather, difficult terrain, and human vulnerability in extreme conditions. But even with these explanations, one problem remains. In many cases, the environment does not just cause the incident. It removes the evidence of it. And when that happens, even the most logical explanation begins to feel incomplete. In most parts of the world, aircraft follow structured routes, guided by radar systems, navigation towers, and continuous communication. In Alaska, the system works differently. Here, aviation is not just transportation. It is a necessity. Across the region between Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik, many communities are not connected by roads. Small aircraft serve as the primary link between settlements, carrying people, supplies, and essential services across vast distances. These flights happen daily. Pilots in Alaska are trained to handle difficult conditions. They navigate through narrow valleys, over mountain ranges, and across long stretches of uninhabited land. Experience is critical, and even routine flights require constant attention. But within the Alaska Triangle, a pattern has emerged over time. Aircraft that depart normally and never arrive. In many cases, there is no warning, no distress signal, no industry signal, no indication of mechanical failure. Communication simply stops. One of the key factors is weather. Conditions in this region can change faster than forecasts can predict. A pilot may begin a flight under clear skies, only to encounter dense fog, heavy snow, or sudden wind shifts mid-route. Visibility can drop to zero within minutes, forcing difficult decisions with limited time. Mountains make the situation more dangerous. Flying at lower altitudes to avoid weather can bring aircraft dangerously close to terrain. In poor visibility, even experienced pilots can lose spatial awareness. A single miscalculation can result in controlled flight into terrain, where the aircraft is flying normally but unknowingly heading toward an obstacle. Navigation systems also face limitations. In remote areas, radar coverage is incomplete. There are zones where aircraft cannot be tracked continuously. Communication signals can weaken or disappear entirely, especially when blocked by mountains or distance. This creates gaps. If an aircraft enters one of these blind areas and something goes wrong, there may be no immediate record of its last position. Search teams are then forced to work with incomplete data, expanding the search area far beyond what would normally be required. And then there is the terrain itself. If a plane crashes in dense forest or mountainous ground, it may not be visible from the air. Snowfall can cover wreckage quickly. Over time, natural processes begin to break down and conceal any remaining evidence. In some cases, even extensive searches fail to locate anything at all. No debris field, no emergency beacon, no confirmed impact site. This is what has led to the idea of vanishing aircraft. Not because planes disappear in a literal sense, but because the conditions in this region allow them to be lost in a way that leaves almost no trace behind. Each incident adds to the pattern. Pilots with experience, aircraft in working condition, routes that have been flown many times before, and yet, under the right combination of weather, terrain, and limited tracking, a flight can end without any clear explanation. From an investigative standpoint, these cases often return to the same conclusion: environmental factors, navigation challenges, communication limits. But when multiple aircraft disappear under similar circumstances and recovery efforts produce no results, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Because in most aviation accidents, something is eventually found. Here, sometimes nothing is. And when an aircraft vanishes in this region, it does not just leave behind questions. It leaves behind silence. For thousands of years before modern maps, aviation routes, or search and rescue systems, this land was already known and understood by the people who lived closest to it. Indigenous communities across Alaska, including the Tlingit, Yupik, and Inuit peoples, developed a deep relationship with the environment long before the idea of the Alaska Triangle ever existed. Their knowledge was not based on theory or speculation, but on survival, observation, and generations of lived experience in one of the harshest climates on Earth. In oral traditions passed down over time, the land is often described in practical terms rather than mystical ones. Certain regions are known to behave unpredictably. Weather can shift without warning. Travel routes that are safe in one season may become dangerous in another. Ice can form and break in ways that are difficult to predict without long-term familiarity. But alongside these practical understandings, there are also cultural interpretations that reflect how deeply the environment shapes human perception. Some stories speak of areas that should be avoided during specific conditions. Others describe places where people have gone missing or failed to return, even when they were experienced hunters or travelers. These accounts are not recorded as scientific evidence, but as part of a broader tradition of caution and respect toward the land. In many indigenous worldviews, the environment is not seen as passive or empty. It is active, responsive, and demanding of awareness. This does not imply supernatural causes in a modern sense, but rather a recognition that nature in this region can behave in ways that are unpredictable and unforgiving. Over time, as modern reports of disappearances increased, some observers began drawing connections between these traditional warnings and the areas now associated with the Alaska Triangle. However, it is important to note that these connections are interpretive, not confirmed by scientific evidence. There is no verified documentation suggesting that indigenous knowledge directly describes a triangle of disappearances. Instead, what exists is a long history of environmental awareness that, in some cases, aligns with modern understanding of how dangerous and complex this terrain can be. For example, experienced hunters have always understood that navigation errors in fog, snow, or whiteout conditions can be fatal. River crossings require careful timing. Mountain travel demands knowledge of weather patterns that can change within hours. These are not mysteries. They are realities of survival in extreme environments. Yet when viewed from the outside, without that context, these same conditions can appear unexplained or unusual. This is where interpretation begins to diverge. What is seen as cultural warning by one perspective may be framed as mystery by another. What is understood locally as environmental risk may appear externally as unexplained disappearance. As modern search efforts continue and more data is collected, researchers increasingly recognize that indigenous knowledge often aligns with known environmental hazards, even if the language used to describe them is different. Still, the Alaska Triangle narrative continues to grow in public imagination, often blending factual history with broader speculation. And within that narrative, indigenous interpretations remain one of the earliest reminders that this land has always required respect, awareness, and caution. Long before it was ever mapped, measured, or named, for decades, one of the more persistent ideas linked to the Alaska Triangle has involved the possibility of navigation disturbances caused by magnetic irregularities. The concept is simple. In a region where pilots, hikers, and search teams rely heavily on compasses and directional systems, even small deviations in magnetic readings can create serious navigation errors. In a place as vast and remote as Alaska, those errors can quickly become dangerous. Some researchers and pilots working in northern regions have reported occasional inconsistencies in compass behavior. In certain areas, instruments may show slight deviations from expected readings or require constant adjustment during flight. These observations are not unique to Alaska, as magnetic variation exists across the globe, especially in polar regions where the Earth's magnetic field naturally behaves differently. However, in the context of the Alaska Triangle narrative, these reports have often been highlighted as a possible contributing factor to disorientation and lost aircraft. It is important to note that there is no conclusive scientific evidence showing the existence of large-scale or extreme magnetic anomalies in this specific region that could directly explain disappearances. Modern geophysical surveys do account for magnetic variation, and aviation systems are designed to adjust for known deviations in different parts of the world. Still, the perception of navigation disruption persists. Part of this comes from the environment itself. Alaska's terrain is filled with mountain ranges, dense forests, and deep valleys. These features can interfere with radio signals, block line-of-sight communication, and create what are effectively blind zones for navigation and tracking systems. In such conditions, even minor instrument inaccuracies can feel amplified. For pilots flying in poor weather or low visibility, reliance on instruments is critical. If those instruments are even slightly off, or if external conditions distort situational awareness, it can become difficult to maintain accurate orientation. In extreme cases, this can contribute to controlled flight into terrain or route deviation. Over time, anecdotal reports from travelers have added to the mystery. Some describe moments where compasses seemed unreliable or where navigation felt inconsistent with expected positioning. However, many of these accounts are difficult to verify and may be influenced by weather conditions, equipment limitations, or human error under stress. From a scientific standpoint, most experts attribute these experiences to a combination of known factors: natural magnetic variation, environmental interference, and the challenges of operating in remote, high-latitude regions. But within the broader narrative of the Alaska Triangle, these explanations do not fully remove the sense of uncertainty, because even when navigation systems function correctly, the environment itself can still make orientation extremely difficult. Snow-covered landscapes can erase visual landmarks. Featureless terrain can make distance perception unreliable. And when visibility drops suddenly, even accurate instruments can feel less trustworthy in practice. This overlap between technical explanation and human experience is what keeps the idea of magnetic disruption alive in public discussion. Not as a confirmed cause of disappearances, but as one more layer in a region where navigation has always been challenging and where getting even slightly lost can have irreversible consequences. In most parts of the world, a missing person or aircraft triggers a coordinated response that can quickly narrow down search areas. But in Alaska, even the most advanced search and rescue systems face a level of difficulty that is hard to replicate elsewhere. The core challenge begins with scale. The region associated with the Alaska Triangle covers an immense expanse of wilderness, stretching across mountains, forests, glaciers, and frozen waterways. Much of this land has no roads, few landing zones, and limited access points. When an incident occurs, reaching the suspected area is often the first major obstacle, not the search itself. Aircraft are usually the primary tool for search operations. Helicopters and fixed-wing planes can cover large areas quickly, but their effectiveness depends heavily on weather conditions. In Alaska, weather can change rapidly and without warning. Clear skies can turn into heavy snow, dense fog, or high winds within minutes, grounding search flights or forcing them to return to base. Visibility is another critical limitation. Even when flights are possible, snow-covered terrain, dense forests, and mountainous shadows can make it extremely difficult to visually identify wreckage or individuals on the ground. From above, large sections of land can appear uniform and unbroken, hiding even significant objects. Ground searches present a different set of challenges. Teams on foot or using vehicles must navigate through uneven terrain, deep snow, thick vegetation, and frozen rivers. Progress is slow, and distances that appear manageable on a map can take days to cover in reality. In many areas, there is no reliable way to move in a straight line due to natural obstacles. Communication adds another layer of difficulty. Remote regions often have weak or non-existent signal coverage. This limits coordination between teams and can delay updates on changing conditions or discoveries in the field. Even when modern technology is used, including satellite imagery and GPS tracking, limitations still exist. Satellites may not capture fine details under dense forest cover or heavy cloud layers. GPS devices can show location data, but they cannot reveal what lies physically hidden beneath terrain or vegetation. Another major factor is time. In cold environments like Alaska, evidence can disappear quickly. Snowfall can cover debris within hours. Wind can shift lightweight materials over long distances. Ice can freeze over impact sites, while seasonal thawing can alter the landscape entirely. By the time search teams arrive, the physical clues needed to determine what happened may already be gone. This creates a recurring problem in many cases. Search operations are launched quickly, resources are deployed, and large areas are scanned. But despite extensive effort, some missions end without any findings. No wreckage, no personal belongings, no clear indication of direction or impact point. These unresolved outcomes are not always due to failure in effort or technology. In many cases, they are the result of environmental conditions that simply do not allow for reliable recovery. Over time, this has contributed to the broader reputation of the Alaska Triangle as a region where disappearances are not only more likely, but also more difficult to resolve. Because here, even when something is lost, finding it again is not guaranteed. No matter how advanced the search effort becomes, as the number of unexplained disappearances associated with the Alaska Triangle grew, so did public speculation. When conventional investigations reached their limits, often due to lack of evidence or incomplete data, alternative theories began to emerge to fill the gaps left behind. Some of the most widely discussed ideas move far beyond traditional explanations of weather, terrain, or human error. One recurring theory involves unidentified flying objects, or UFO activity. This idea suggests that remote and sparsely monitored regions like Alaska could provide conditions where unusual aerial phenomena might go unnoticed. Reports from pilots and residents in northern regions have occasionally described unusual lights or unexplained aerial movements. However, none of these accounts have been officially verified or linked to any disappearance in a confirmed way. Another theory centers around hidden military installations. Because Alaska holds strategic importance due to its proximity to the Arctic and Russia, some speculation suggests the presence of undisclosed facilities in remote areas. In this context, disappearances are sometimes theorized without evidence to be connected to restricted zones or classified operations. There is, however, no credible documentation supporting any connection between such installations and missing persons cases in the Alaska Triangle. A more abstract set of theories focuses on natural energy anomalies, or so-called vortex zones. These ideas propose that certain regions of the Earth may contain unusual energetic properties that could interfere with navigation or even physical presence. These concepts are not recognized in mainstream science, and there is no empirical evidence that such phenomena exist in Alaska or anywhere else in a way that could explain disappearances. Interdimensional theories also appear in popular discussions. These suggest that individuals or aircraft might vanish due to unknown shifts in dimensions or realities. While these ideas are often featured in online speculation and fictional storytelling, they are not supported by scientific research or observational data. Despite the lack of evidence behind these claims, they continue to circulate widely in media and online communities. Part of their persistence comes from the same factor that defines the Alaska Triangle itself: missing information. When investigations end without clear answers, the human mind naturally seeks alternative explanations. In regions where evidence is often erased by weather, terrain, or time, uncertainty creates space for imagination to grow. Still, from a scientific and investigative standpoint, there is no verified link between any of these theories and the actual disappearances recorded in Alaska. Most documented cases continue to be explained through environmental hazards, aviation risk factors, and the logistical challenges of search and rescue in remote terrain. Even so, these unconventional theories have become part of the broader narrative surrounding the region. They shape how the Alaska Triangle is perceived in popular culture, not as a defined scientific anomaly, but as a place where unanswered questions tend to accumulate. And in the absence of complete answers, speculation often becomes part of the story itself. As investigations into Alaska's disappearances continue, a clearer picture begins to form. But it is not one that resolves into a single explanation. Instead, it sits between two competing realities: what is known through science and what remains uncertain due to missing evidence. From a scientific and law enforcement perspective, The majority of disappearances in the Alaska Triangle can be explained through well-understood factors. The environment is extreme, the terrain is unforgiving, and the infrastructure is limited. Accidents involving aviation, exposure to severe weather, getting lost in vast wilderness, and delays in rescue operations all account for a large portion of missing persons cases. In many situations where evidence is eventually recovered, the findings support these conclusions. Aircraft wreckage is sometimes located in remote valleys or buried under snow. Missing persons are occasionally found after exposure-related incidents. These outcomes reinforce the understanding that Alaska's natural conditions alone are enough to create high-risk scenarios without requiring any unusual explanation. However, this explanation does not cover every case. There remain incidents where the expected physical evidence is absent. No wreckage is found. No clear signal is recorded. No definitive trail is left behind. Even after extensive search operations, some cases remain open or unresolved. It is this gap between expected outcomes and actual findings that keeps the Alaska Triangle in a unique position. From a scientific standpoint, absence of evidence is not evidence of something unknown. It often reflects the limitations of search conditions, environmental erasure, or incomplete data. Snow, ice, dense forest, and time itself can remove traces of even significant events. In remote regions, this process happens faster and more completely than in most other parts of the world. But from a public perspective, repeated unresolved cases create a different impression. When enough incidents remain incomplete, patterns appear, even if those patterns are influenced by geography and reporting bias rather than any single underlying cause. This is where the Alaska Triangle exists in a complex space. On one side is measurable reality, documented terrain risks, aviation challenges, and environmental extremes that are well understood. On the other side is perception, a collection of unresolved stories, missing evidence, and unanswered questions that naturally invite speculation. The tension between these two perspectives is what sustains the region's reputation. Experts generally emphasize that Alaska is not unique in having missing persons cases, but it is unique in scale, conditions, and difficulty of recovery. When combined, these factors make resolution harder, not necessarily the incidents themselves more unusual. Still, the emotional impact of unresolved disappearances cannot be ignored. For families, investigators, and even the public, unanswered cases carry a weight that extends beyond statistics. A case without closure becomes something more than a report. It becomes a question that lingers. Over time, that uncertainty shapes the identity of the Alaska Triangle, not as a confirmed anomaly, and not as a proven mystery, but as a region where the limits of investigation are constantly tested. In the end, what defines this area is not a single explanation, but the coexistence of two truths. One is that nature alone is powerful enough to account for most disappearances. The other is that in some cases, the evidence simply does not survive long enough to tell the full story. And between those two realities, the Alaska Triangle continues to exist, both fully explained and yet never completely understood.